All right, folks, so I'm having to eat a little crow here. Today is the 10th of March, year 2024, before the 2024 election. So I'm going to read this description that I wrote here. So I'm trashing my earlier entire opinion on the Trump appeal to be put back on the Colorado ballot, because before I wrote it, I had only listened to some of the summaries posted online. Those summaries were wrong in one critical point, and I could not quite make sense of the opinion as a result. And that made me actually download the Supreme Court judgment document for the return to the ballot and read at least the first couple of pages of it. And I will admit that that is a bit difficult to do once they throw in all the references. So I did not look at the references. I took their opinion on the references and just went with the comments the Supreme Court made, and assuming the references were correct and their comments therefore logically followed, the decision makes, I guess, perfect sense. I mean, there's really an open and shut case here. So the point is that filled in some of the glaring blanks on the online opinions that were issued before the ruling was issued. And that is a reality that has some significant consequences. So anyway, basically those reviews had one key word that was wrong. Those opinions said that the Supreme Court said that the states have control of state ballots, but not control of the federal ballot. And a lot was made about the idea of the Supreme Court lining up behind Trump on this because he didn't want to have a hash of different state ballots. That wasn't even the issue. I can see that some people would think that based upon the incorrect information about lack of control of the state ballots. But that's not even close to really how the judgment came out. It's merely superficially close and really more of a diversion, I think, more than anything else. So the Supreme Court properly straightened out this whole issue in its review, and if you correct that one word, the ballots, it makes perfect sense. The real issue of control is over the officials. The question is punishing and preventing insurrectionists from being reelected or elected in the first place to office. The states have control over their state officials and state elections, but they do not have control over the federal officials and federal elections, and that's why the removal from the state ballot was reversed by the Supreme Court. Only the federal government has control over federal officials, and the presidency is a federal office. So while one could at least entertain the idea of the states removing a state official from the state ballot, there still is another factor that has to be considered, and that is the whole issue. There still is another factor that has to be considered, and that is the whole issue of states' rights. And apparently, in the years following the Civil War, the Reconstruction efforts made by the federal government essentially nuked the whole concept of states' rights, which is why we have federal review of state laws in the first place, state policies and state laws in the first place at this time in the country's history. Where arguably before the war we would not have had federal review of Jim Crow laws or any of the gerrymandering or so forth that's gone on in various states. Now we do because of the Reconstruction efforts. So given that gave the Supreme Court the authority to reverse the state court decision. So that was the other half of it that was important. So now the problem with the fact that, and I'll go ahead and say it, fact that Trump is an insurrectionist and the GOP party is insurrectionist. Unfortunately, that means that the insurrectionists now have the majority vote in Congress, and there's no way that we're going to have congressional action to remove Trump from or keep him off the ballot because the party that runs Congress is that same group of insurrectionists. We have a delay of the issue for 3.5 years now that has slid by the review and oversight of the Democrats and the President of the United States. And it's important for people to realize that you can't have congressional oversight, proper oversight of state elections and preventing insurrectionists from being on the state elections if Congress is run by the same group of insurrectionists. And this all should have been raised a long time ago, a long, long time ago. It was not. Even in the weeks leading up to the Supreme Court review, even in probably a lot of the arguments made, front of the court arguments made to the Supreme Court, I don't ever remember anyone ever bringing this issue up before now, and I think a lot of people were blindsided by this very point. So, gotta hand it to Trump's lawyers in this case. They did their job well. The Supreme Court did its job well if the ruling is actually logical, following from the references given by the Supreme Court. And I think a lot of people need to sit down and realize that they've been snookered somewhere, somehow. Too many lawyers talking about this case before the decision was ruled to even raise this possibility, and people just not get it. Something definitely went wrong here. At this point, one is looking at Trump and his lawyers running rings around the Democrats and Biden on this issue. And the larger issue is that there is really no way this should be going on 3.5 years after the crimes of the 2020 election. And now I think you really have to take a look at some of the arguments that Trump has been making about Biden and the Democratic Party also, and liberals and centrists, even centrists and moderates in the GOP, to allow this all to happen. It's all like, oh, gee, we got to the point where we really had nothing to do about it. Now let's see if we can delay the public realizing this as long as possible so we can get out of the situation more or less with our chins clean, frankly, and just run away from it. Because at this point, that's looking pretty much like, he's going to have to make a stand and literally win the election despite anything and everything the GOP does over the next 9 months to make sure he loses. It's pretty much what it's going to have to be. It's going to be a winner-take-all election, and I will say the dirtiest politician in the history of the country might actually pull it out, despite blatant nonsense by him and his supporters. He still might actually get reelected to the presidency. And if he does, way too much talk on the news that's about how bad they are, but not enough talk on the news about keeping an eye on the bad stuff that he's doing and his party's done. So that's pretty much where we are right now.